Well, happy to have you on East Asia tonight. Now, Chinese language learning is falling in English-speaking countries, from the US to the UK and several others in Europe. In New Zealand, the number of students studying Chinese at university has dropped more than 50% compared to 10 years ago. Well, CNA's Tan Chiu-yi finds out why.
我家有5口人，我爱吃苹果。
Their first try at learning Mandarin. Most of the young people at this summer class are here because of a personal interest.
A lot of Chinese people around me and like Chinese parts of the Chinese culture in Auckland and near where I live, and it's something I see. So I guess it makes me more curious.
I went on a school trip in high school to China because I was a business student, and we learned about the strong connections between New Zealand and China. And I think it's an increasingly important language, especially if you're living in the Pacific.
First-hand contact with the language and culture means China is no longer just a country on the other side of the world. But these Mandarin learners are becoming a rare breed in New Zealand.
So we are having a national level decline in students' interest in picking up Mandarin Chinese.
Mandarin was once the darling of foreign language learning at the University of Auckland. In the early 2000s, students camped out overnight to make sure they got a spot in the Chinese language program.
Mandarin learning in New Zealand surged in the 10 years before 2020 at the primary school level, according to the latest available statistics. But the pipeline of students appears to have dried up at secondary schools and in university.
In 2022, the number of students learning Mandarin at universities across the whole of New Zealand was just 255, a 57% drop from 2010. At least one university recently closed its Mandarin and Asian Studies programs. Several others are downsizing their offerings because of budget issues and low enrollment.
So we are not talking about losing 1 or 2 students, 1 or 2 classes. We are talking about losing the entire program and the teaching team.
Analysts say that with AI and translation apps, basic Mandarin no longer gives young people a leg up in the job market. Tensions between China and the West have also meant bad press, with Chinese learners getting caught in the crossfire.
One of the students said students choosing Mandarin Chinese might be regarded as pro-China, pro-Communist Party of China, which they have really never thought about when they started doing Chinese. And this is really, pushing them to a corner.
This despite the fact that China is New Zealand's biggest trading partner.
Partly because many of the people learning Mandarin have not necessarily gone into businesses connected with it. Many of the people who are involved with our interactions with China are themselves from China, so obviously the language is not an issue for them.
But he says for business partners to work well, understanding each other goes a long way. Tan Chiu-yi, CNA, Auckland.
Mandarin learning may be falling in the West, but reports suggest it's still going strong in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Saudi Arabia made Mandarin learning compulsory in secondary schools last year, joining the United Arab Emirates, Egypt and Iran, who have added the language to their national curriculums. And in Southeast Asia, Mandarin is taught in all Singapore schools, remains robust in Malaysia, and also shows signs of gaining popularity in Vietnam and Indonesia. Well, for more insight, let's speak with Ferry Ansuri. He's the head of Mandarin language and Chinese culture at the University of Al-Azhar, Indonesia, and he is joining us from Jakarta. Well, thanks for joining us this evening. So Mandarin appears that it's declining in the West, even as China rises. If more business people don't learn Mandarin, Mr. Ansari, how will this impact future trade relationships and negotiations with China?
Oh, well, thank you, Oteli. You know that today's economy has become a global village where multinational corporations are more common than ever before. And with the constant growth of international businesses, the importance of communicating in worldwide scale also continues to grow. As for Chinese, why many Indonesian students are willing to learn the language? Because Mandarin can benefit their future business. Or personal study, for example. For the past decade, Indonesia and China have conducted a very productive in a wide range of fields cooperation. I mean, China has been Indonesia's top trading partner and a major source of investment. So, I mean, it is a very good opportunity for the Indonesian student to learn Chinese.
Can technology, though, like we've got so many translation apps out there, or we have AI, can that actually fill the gap? Or do you think when it comes to Mandarin, speaking the language is essential for successful business dealings in China?
Oh, well, you know, it is true. It is correct that now the technology also grows rapidly, like the AI technology, for example. But in some aspects, of course, this kind of technology really couldn't take the, I mean, for example, like translations or even the human's voice, for example. It is so very hard to make a very 100% correct, for example, like the translation. So it is still very need to improve the Chinese
Mr.
language.
Ansari, can you give us some
teaching.
examples of that then? You were saying that such a, like, Google Translate, for instance, cannot give the language justice, or when you're dealing with somebody, for instance, what can possibly get lost in translation?
Yeah, for example, like there are a lot of words very, very similar. You know, in China, in Chinese, Chinese is a tonal language. They have tones, and so also the characters. For example, if you say, for example, some words, yi, for example, in Chinese language, yi, they have a lot of e in Chinese language. For example, e with the meanings with one, or e for the meanings with like ai, for example, or for example like e, 一个, or for example like in others tones, for example like my or my in Chinese language means buy, to buy, and my in Chinese language also different tones means to sell. So this is cannot be taken by the machine, of course.
Well, not yet at the moment as well, and there are 4 tones as well for the Chinese words.
Yes, of course.
What's really interesting, Mr. Ansari, is that how there is growing interest in learning Mandarin in Middle Eastern countries. And how do you think this reflects their geopolitical priorities?
Well, of course, for the Indonesian students, for the learners, I think the reasons why they are learning Chinese, of course, because it will give them more advantages for their futures. You know, as for the China's economy, growth so very fast, with China becoming an economic superpower and the most populous country globally, learning Mandarin will be immensely helpful for anyone who wants to get ahead in their career or business ventures. And also with China rapidly expanding their science and technology sectors, the country's influence also will continue to grow. And for Indonesia, of course, you know, Indonesia and China has always becoming a very good economic partner, and even now, like the for example, the project under the Belt and Road Initiative, the high railway speed from Jakarta to Bandung is become one of the most favorite transportation from Jakarta to Bandung for locals. So I think it is also a very good you know, for the developing the Indonesian and China cooperation in the future.
Yeah. So, Mr. Ansari, you know, as Mandarin becomes more widespread, maybe less so in the West, do you think then there will be a rise in Chinese cultural influence and values, and that could potentially challenge the Western cultural dominance that's shaping and shapes a new global cultural landscape? Do you think that might happen?
I don't think so, because you know every culture had its own characteristic, of course. But of course, you know, one of the reason why the students they may be interesting in learning Chinese because it is rich in Chinese culture and history. You know, China is one of the most ancient civilizations that still exists today. It is home to some of the world's oldest continuous traditions. So the culture and history of China are something that many foreigners struggle to understand. But still, I mean, learning a language such as Mandarin can unlock your insight into one of the most fascinating cultures in the world has to offer. I mean, even if traditional Chinese culture is not interesting to you, for example, modern and pop Chinese culture is still prominent in today's media. From its trendy Chinese food, for example, fashion, technology, etc. So there is just so much to explore in Chinese culture.
I totally agree with that. Thank you so very much for your time and your insights. Ferry Ansari, Head of Mandarin Language and Chinese Culture at the University of Al-Azhar, Indonesia.